So welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. Today we're going to be talking about universities and how they're coping with change. We've heard a lot in the last day or so about innovation. Traditional institutions are now hiring innovation officers and embracing digital delivery. Digitization of information, access to data, and the democratization of knowledge are transforming higher education. And universities are being asked, are they doing enough to prepare students for the future? As costs rise, they're under more pressure to become accountable, and students are becoming consumers rather than grateful recipients of a university education. So how are universities adapting? Should they become more entrepreneurial or collaborate more? Can they broaden their reach? What will the university of the future look like? And are lectures a thing of the past? All of our guests today are working with universities which are experimenting with new ways of doing things. We have, let me just find my introductions. Jeroen Jans. Jeroen is Director of Education at Erasmus University Rotterdam, and he also teaches media and communication. He first began teaching in the 1980s, and even then he tried to mix things up. He's interested in how students' engagement in their learning affects their development. Next, Mariella van der Meer is Vice President of Global Affairs at the African Leadership University, which is a new and innovative university with a mission of educating 3 million ethical leaders for Africa and the world by 2060. Next is Navid Ijaz. He's Regional Manager, Middle East and Africa for Minerva Schools at KGI. He's got more than 10 years of experience of working internationally in student recruitment, partnerships and counselling. And last, Dr. Philip Regier is Dean for Educational Initiatives at Arizona State University, and he's also in charge of an initiative to make the university more inclusive at a digital level. His university enrolls some 40,000 fully online students in degree programs. So I wondered if we could kick off perhaps with just each of you in a nutshell, give me your thoughts on what are the biggest issues facing universities and higher education. I don't know, Jeroen, if you want to.
Yes, I would like to kick off. Just to clarify, I'm from Holland, public university, and that is a difference compared to some other schools. And one of the big challenges we face is increasing student numbers, and that goes very quickly, coinciding with a development I very much support, the internationalization of our student body. So we have students from all over the globe coming to our university to get a high quality education. Challenge is to make internationalization of your program. That means diversifying your teaching staff. That means a focus on inclusiveness as one of the key features of your program. And that's a challenge that goes beyond just teaching in English or just having a non-Dutch international teaching staff.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Yes. So in my view, I think the three main challenges of the traditional higher education model and that we're facing today have to do with relevance, accessibility, and affordability. So I think a lot of the traditional universities are still very much modeled on how they were designed centuries ago, and that model hasn't really changed that much. And obviously the world has changed a lot. And I think a lot of universities are trying to innovate, but are very much impaired by the legacies that they carry and the systems that they need to sustain. So it's very hard to innovate within that discourse that has been going on for centuries. And if you combine that with accessibility issues, caps on the number of places that are available at universities, and then a very, very big pain point is affordability. So how can you actually solve for all those challenges? What we are doing, but we'll talk about it a little bit later, but I actually firmly believe that it's easier to start something completely from scratch than to try and change something that already exists. So we've actually started building a whole new university from scratch.
Hi, everyone. So I very strongly believe that two of the biggest factor for the higher education to sort of change one is globalization, and the other one is the change or the progress that technology has made. I mean, when we go back and look back, and you see what Marielle was also talking about, universities 500 to 700 years ago, it's still the same process as in, we still go by the old ways as lecturing and all of that. And, whereas when we see as to how much we have progressed in today's world, so universities, I think, in other words, are also sort of like there's a lot of pressure on higher education institutions also to adapt to these changes. Thank you.
So obviously I'm going to speak from a United States perspective. That's what I know best. And there are two critical challenges in the United States. The first one is what we refer to as the achievement gap. And this is the idea that if you're from a low socioeconomic status, there's a much lower probability that you'll ever graduate with a university degree. If you're from the top income quartile, there's an 80% chance that you receive a university degree. If you're from any of the bottom three quartiles, the bottom 75%, there's only a 28% chance that you'll receive a degree. If you have the misfortune to be born into the bottom income quartile, there's only about a 10% chance that you receive a degree. So that's an incredible challenge for the United States. And I'd say the second big challenge is the fact that United States schools may be easy to get into, but they're hard to get out of. And so 50% of the people who begin post-secondary education in the US never graduate with any type of certificate 6 years later. So there are 44 million people in the United States who have some post-secondary education, but no degree. And the rewards, the economic rewards, the life rewards, the civic responsibility rewards, go to people who have at least an undergraduate degree. So that's a huge problem and a huge overhang that we have to overcome.
Okay, thank you. I wondered if we wanted to talk about student involvement and possibly when you're scaling up and making things more accessible, how difficult that becomes. We've heard in this conference that actually learners like to be engaged personally. They like the sort of one-to-one from academics. So do you not lose that with digital delivery? Do you not lose that with the sort of upscaling that you might be talking about? I don't know who wants to.
Well, if you refer to digital tools we may use, it's rather the opposite. And I like to emphasize that when you introduce digital technology in your teaching, and my perspective now is combining it with campus teaching, you should be aware of the fact that it's not just throwing instruments at people, and people can include teachers as well as students, but it's also about the culture. It facilitates clearly a culture, what we could abbreviate as co-creation, because you can create many opportunities for students to be active online, create products online, sitting together wherever they want, at home or on campus, and then have that product and have your teachers relate to that product and have the students, well, to help them to raise their hand one little bit higher. So I'm very much in favor of, and I could cite many examples of how we do that at Erasmus University, where students are completely involved in these projects, especially building on the opportunities your digital tools offer you.
Yeah, I actually want to comment from a slightly different perspective, I think. So not so much around a digital perspective, but I think that moving towards a learning model that is more student-driven versus teacher-driven. I think traditionally education has kind of centered around the professor, because obviously the professor was the person who was kind of holding the access to information. But at this day and age, information is readily available with a click of a finger. So a student can actually really take ownership of their own learning experience, and that also facilitates peer learning. So I think if you allow for students to actively create their own learning, curate their own learning environment and their own learning experience, and engage in student-driven and peer-to-peer kind of activities, and the role of the professor to become much more one of a facilitator rather than the holder of knowledge. I think in that way you can scale and you can involve students, and you can also make full use of digital sources in that process. So that's how I would see that.
For us at Minerva, I am very proud of the fact that we call ourselves a very non-traditional school. So everything that we do is against the traditional system, from the way we deliver the program. So, I mean, in fact, everything that we have in terms of the classroom experience and everything, it's through a forum that we use. So it used to be called Active Learning Forum. We just recently renamed it to Forum. So what happens is that it has active engagement of the students. So we use flipped classroom model where the student actually get pre-readings before they come to the class. So it's kind of like having their homework and having the lecture before they come to the class. So when they come to the class, it's much more debate and discussion. And that's how we sort of engage them into, making sure that they acquire the practical skills that they require. So it's a very different system, and I'm sure we're talking about lectures later on, right? So I can give you much more detail on that.
So I guess 5 or 6 years ago, it suddenly struck me that this idea that digital learning is depersonalized is exactly the wrong take. This is very much a traditional classroom model. And right now, I'm treating every person in the room in exactly the same way. I'm basically producing a product. It's faculty-centric. What I want to teach you is what you're going to learn, and that's it. One thing that we've done, and I can talk about a few things, but one thing that we've done that's been incredibly successful has been to adopt adaptive learning technology at freshman level classes, first year classes, that traditionally had failure rates of 25 to 35%. Those systems treat every student individually. They understand what you know and you know and you know about a particular topic is different, and they feed up content based upon that prior knowledge. We then go into a classroom where the faculty have a dashboard, understand exactly what the different students know, can divide them into small groups. The students who are achieving at a high level can be challenged further, and the faculty can really focus on assisting students who need remediation. So it is, in fact, a much more personalized model. And by the way, the failure rates in those classes have gone from 25 to 35% to closer to 5 to 10%. So it's incredibly effective. It's much more personalized. And I have other examples as well.
I wanted to move on, actually, and look now at the role of research within universities and the relationship between that and teaching. So we've heard, obviously we all know the model of a tenured professor who finds students a slight annoyance and interruption to his or her research. But do students still want that sort of academic background, that backup of knowledge and rigor behind the people who teach them, or is there more space now for Mariella's model of teachers who aren't necessarily focused on their research? I don't know, Jeroen, if you want to.
There are definitely big differences between what one could call a traditional university dating back centuries. Across the board, across many countries I'm familiar with, the emphasis definitely is on research. If a university is well organized, the fruits from research translate into teaching. That's, for me, as a director of education, one of the things that I can inspire teachers to spend time on increasing their qualification, to offer them courses where they can communicate about their own research. But we should also note that when we talk about research-based teaching, it's also about that it's very important to study your interventions and to see to what extent they're effective. And that's often forgotten. I think traditional universities have a role here because they already have that huge knowledge potential in research. They have qualified people, as we have at my own university. So what we also do is we experiment with certain changes in, for example, teaching format, and we study these in longitudinal formats in order to see whether that's effective and whether the effects are as predicted. Fortunately, they often are, but sometimes they are not. And I consider it very brave of my bosses, the executive board of the university, that we also decided to stop one of the innovations at Erasmus University because it did not deliver the effects one thought beforehand. So research is in fact, has two phases. You see two different things. One is the research qualification of the university per todo, relating to the knowledge you want to transfer. You want to engage students in acquiring that knowledge. That's the message. But on the other hand, there's also research about how you teach in the field of didactics, for example. And I consider that to be very important.
But I think there's a problem, isn't there, with the new universities setting up. It takes too long to, set up the whole infrastructure of a traditional university. So how do you cope?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about that, because obviously, and specifically to the African context, right? So if you look at Africa, it's the fastest growing continent in the world. It will soon, by 2035, it will have the largest young workforce in the world. It will have 1 billion workers, more than China, more than India. However, if you look at tertiary enrollment rates at the moment across the continent, it's about 10%. That compares to about 26% in India and 70% in Europe and the US. So obviously we're sitting on a brink of a potential crisis here that is not just a crisis for Africa, but it's a crisis for the world. So if we wanted to build enough universities the size of Harvard to actually get to the enrollment rates of, let's say, India, so 26%, which is not even that much neither, we would have to build 17 Harvards for the next 20 years, every year. So you can't do that. So as you say, there's not enough people, and there's not enough there's a scarcity of professors and of academia to do that. So that's definitely one of the reasons why we are not focusing on research. But that's not to say that research should be discarded altogether. But I think this is where partnerships come in as well. Like, how can we actually actively engage? Like moving away from the more traditional model, but there's still different ways of doing research. There's also ways of doing research within industries and not necessarily within academia. There's ways in which academic collaborative partnerships can kind of like infuse research into the newer universities that might not have that capacity themselves, and that become much more of a blended system. So that's kind of how I look at it.
I don't know if, Naveed, do you want to say something on what Minerva's doing?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to what the objective or the mission was when the university started. So we are also a new school. We started 7 years ago. And our objective was to nurture critical wisdom. And that's how Minerva is being designed. So we focus much more on, in terms of partnership, we work very closely with industries. I'll go back as to how the model works. So, I mean, we wanted to have students who have global access in terms of the exposure to other countries of the world. So what we did, we designed a program where a student actually goes across 7 different countries of the world. So you sort of start your first year being in San Francisco, and then you move to Berlin, Argentina, Taiwan, South Korea, India, UK, and then you go back to America. And then again, I mean, it's not only like you moving around, it's how the program is delivered, as to what I was talking before, that we use that forum to deliver the program, but what exactly they do when they are in a particular country. And that is like we engage them with the companies. So, I mean, to be very honest, as in for the past 3 years I've been with Minerva, we have students who have the opportunities to be with some of the Fortune 200 companies in the world. And I mean, when we speak about, I mean, in terms of the difference in curriculum also, I mean, we have a lot of proof points as to where it came through. I mean, just to give you a reference, there is assessment that has been done in the US. It's called CLA Plus. So it actually looks at the impact curriculum has on the student. And so what we do is we let our students take the exam before they come to Minerva, and 1 year after, they are at the university, 2 years after they are at the university, 3 years and 4 years. So last year when our students took the exam before they joined the school, they scored on 70th percentile, which was very good. It kind of gives us an idea how good the student is. But then these guys took the exam after the first year of being there at Minerva, and they scored on 99th percentile, which was the highest in terms of the improvement the curriculum has. So just to give you a quick thing about the curriculum. So with Minerva, what we did is we designed a curriculum very differently as compared to other schools. Like our first year is completely focused on giving them skills like critical thinking, creative thinking, effective interaction, communication, negotiation, teamwork, and it's all about that. So it doesn't matter what major the student is doing, whether they want to whether they want to do natural sciences or they want to do computational sciences or arts and humanities or anything. The first year is all about core competencies, and that's what we do.
So I'd say that most people would agree that at the core of a traditional university are these twin concepts of knowledge creation and knowledge dissemination. And faculty are, and so the knowledge dissemination piece relies heavily on students. The knowledge creation piece relies heavily on faculty. But we are definitely a student-centric university. But we also view our faculty as knowledge entrepreneurs and knowledge innovators. And so our faculty produced $620 million in funded research last year. And it is the core of what we do at a university, and it is the core of what students seek to a great extent. So students are on a process of discovery. And what we like to say is in the DNA of the university is also the notion of knowledge, discovery, and creation as well. So at least and that doesn't mean that every university is the same way. We have had waves of university in the United States. There are some that are Greek teaching academies, essentially. There are some that are large land-grant universities that were originally focused on agricultural research. The research university came in after the German model. And now we're on a kind of a fifth wave of what a university can be, but it doesn't throw away anything from the successive ages, but it builds on it to be more effective and more efficient and reach more people more effectively than before.
Okay.
Can I add something about it? Maybe a kind of hobby horse about the German model, where we're referring to von Humboldt, and it's often also in my country and many other European countries, that's where research universities come from. That's indeed the case. But the key word in that idea was Bildung, very difficult to translate in English, but in the original idea, it was really meant as a merger between research and schooling and education. And in some cases, politically defined mostly, that's forgotten. So I like to quote the original work of Humboldt in this respect, also in the things I communicate in the Netherlands, because we should be aware of the fact that universities are schools. And maybe this preaching for our own choir here, because we're all involved in teaching, but it's sometimes forgotten. And if people want to dedicate their time to research, well, start a research company or start a research and development unit in a company.
But isn't the danger with refocusing on the education, pulling faculty in towards innovating? How do you bring your staff on board with innovation? I mean, you're obviously very innovative universities, but there are plenty who aren't, who have sort of faculty kicking and screaming in terms of modernising.
You're right, your observation is right. It's very difficult, but I think what we heard from the panel, I think one thing in common is if you really are student-focused, your students are your allies, because they want to, of course, they want to develop their qualification, and they want to be socialized into a certain, let's say, academic discipline, but they do so by working on the fruits of research, and that can be translated into textbooks or courses or whatever, but especially at the advanced level, it's very rewarding for students to work on their own projects, as it is, by the way, for the teachers who are then in a different role. They're not standing in front of a classroom telling them what the world is like, but engaging with them, and that's what co-creation is about. You have a kind of equal starting level, but of course you have different roles, because as an academic, as a highly qualified whatever, professor or what have you, it's your duty to transfer that knowledge in such a way that it's not a transference project, but you create a community of engagement. And that's something people have to learn at universities.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if we've got any questions from the floor. We've got about another 5 minutes left, so it'd be great to get some questions. I think the microphone's heading your way.
Thank you very much. You talk about academia and research as something that's valuable for teachers and for the universities, but what do you think about teachers spending part of the time doing work, with companies and bringing their students in that experience? I think Minerva takes the students on the experience, but what about taking the teachers? So they don't stay only in the academia, but they also bring their experience to the practice.
In our case, we actually use a mixture of academia and industry leaders to teach our students. So a lot of our facilitators are actually working alongside of teaching for us. So bring that industry kind of experience back into the classroom. So we definitely make use of that at ALU. And I think that creates a very rich environment because it's also very enriching for the students to be exposed to that. Yeah.
I think, just to give an idea about with Minerva, it doesn't matter which location you're in, students have co-curriculars and extracurriculars. And those are always mentored by the faculty. So you have a lot of location-based assignments, like for example, if you're in San Francisco, and the way it works is like, let's say I'm a student qualified for Minerva and this is my first week in San Francisco. Within the first week itself, we have an event called Consequent, where we invite some of the partners, we call them the civic partners in the city. And that actually goes back to professional development, because it's a very different system that we have. So let's say there is a group that will qualify this year, and by May or June, the Prof Dev will send them forms as to know which companies they want to work for, what careers they want to go ahead and, proceed further with. So based on that, they pick and choose different civic partners as to which partners to engage. And obviously that's been mentored by faculty. So faculty do have not only the interaction with the industry because they are the one monitoring the entire thing, but also they do a lot of research with them also. So we do have a system where one thing I just want to bring out in terms of costing also. So Minerva is a school that is need blind, need meet, which means 80% of the students that are studying with us, they are at least on $20,000 financial aid. And out of 80%, there might be maybe 30 to 40% that are not paying anything. So we do have work studies for these kids. So while they are on term with us, so the work study is not only internally with Minerva, but that's outsourced with the companies also. Whereas Minerva is the one who's paying for it. So, of course, it needs a lot of coaching, mentoring, and all of that happens. So the faculty is part of it as to, how they monitor it.
I'd just add very quickly, if I could. First off, it's a very good idea. And secondly, I think the research aspect is very important here. The reason people provide, for example, $600 million of research is because that research is valuable to somebody. And that by itself has faculty working with hundreds of companies at ASU. Very good idea.
Okay. Another question over here, thanks.
Hi, so I know the focus of the panel has mainly been on sort of bringing the digital age to universities in terms of like students and the interactions, but my question is actually more around the administration of schools. So the first interaction a student would have with a university is when they apply. And at the minute, that process is still completely archaic. They're asking you, some of them, to physically post applications in. They want you to physically bring in transcripts. So my question is around, in terms of bringing universities into the digital age, what sort of work is being done to bring that as well? Because that's the first point of contact. And a lot of students are lost at that point because it's really difficult at the minute for them to figure out that process.
Man, are you ever right? It is a horrible, broken process. And so let me just demonstrate. And so as we expand online programming, there's a huge opportunity to have international students. It is a horrible process that we have in place. And so we're slowly transforming it. Let me just point out one thing that we did. We have something called Global Freshman Academy, which is open-scale freshman-level courses, first-year courses. What we finally did is we found that the process was so hard to get through for a traditional application. We said if a student is 22 years or older, and we had to do that because we have some rules by our governing body, the regions, but if a student is 22 years or older, they can take 5 of these courses. If they get the right grades, we will automatically admit them to the university. We'll find their transcript later, we'll figure out how the prior credits work, et cetera, et cetera. But it's basically you can be admitted by proving, by earning your way into the university. That's a much better way than having students fill out something and then having a bunch of, well, anyway, the process is horribly broken. I agree.
Okay, we're almost out of time, so if you very briefly, yeah.
Okay, so at Minerva, you know, we have a very different system. So it's all online. So a student can go online and they can apply. But we don't look into any of the standardized testing. So we would normally consider, like any other school, SAT or any other testing. So we have our own assessment that the student has to take online. So this is just to make sure that, I mean, see, one of the things that we wanted education to be accessible to everybody, irrespective of the country or region they are coming from, and irrespective of their financial ability. So it's all about, like, it's a 3-stage process that, in simple words, that they have to complete. Who they are, how they think, and what they have achieved in life. So who you are is just a form that you complete. How you think, every student goes through 6 assessments. That is more about, you know, there is maths and a bit more things like interview and all of that. And achievement part is like what they have achieved so far. And that's
Okay.
simply the process.
Okay. Quick input for that?
I think I'm a little more optimistic at let's say, processing the documents. I'm talking about a program, my own program, that hosts students from 92 different nationalities, so we know what we're talking about with respect to processing documents, etc. But we also use the affordances of the online world, because we link students very early on to a more advanced student, and they already communicate online using Facebook, Insta, or whatever, to create a certain type of, let's say, link with the university. So that's the reason for my optimism, and that works very well. And that also means that we were able to reduce the not show up rate incredibly, because people already experience that are part of a community.
Okay, thank you. I think we'd like to end on that optimistic note. Where we've heard from sort of very forward-thinking universities, so it does make you wonder in the future whether the best universities will be those that carry on doing what they're doing better, or the ones that are really agile and change with the times. Okay, thank you very much.